The like best example that I can give is, we've all watched either reality TV or sitcoms or a little less so in hour-long dramas, but we've all seen something where somebody is like wearing a shirt, right? And the shirt is blurred out. Like you're not supposed to be able to tell what's on the shirt, or like somebody is drinking something from a cup and the cup is blurred out, or like bottles on a table are blurred out. That's because they didn't get clearance to use those things. So let's see. Um, yeah, anything that is created by a human is copyrightable. So like the notes that you're taking right now, or like doodles in a margin, or like pictures that you've taken on your phone, um, literally anything that you've created as a human being, um, is protected under copyright law. And it varies from country to country, but in the US, like that's just it. Like if I were to take a photo of the class right now, the photo that I took would be owned by me as the photographer. Or, the notes that you're writing right now would be owned by you as the author. Um, and so when you're filming something, obviously you are also creating something, but you are using other artwork. And I'm using artwork as like a broad term to cover everything, to cover everything under the umbrella, right? Um, so anything that you use in a film production has to be, quote unquote, cleared for use. That means you have to have permission from the owner to put it in your production, because it is also another piece of artwork. So that's what a clearance person does. There's different titles for it: clearance supervisor, clearance coordinator, archival producer, legal clearances, that sort of thing. I like to use clearances coordinator, because the biggest the biggest part of my job is coordinating with the different departments. Um, so what a clearance coordinator does in in a usual day to day is that, we coordinate with the different departments, with art department, set design, set direction, or set decoration, sorry, props, wardrobe, to make sure that the things that they want to use are cleared. And that can also go over into post production, because a lot of productions, sometimes like to license clips of other properties to use in their productions. Whenever a character is watching a TV show or watching a movie, we have to license those clips from the studios that own them, to be able to, get their permission to use those. And then in that process, you have to clear the talent that is within those. You have to get their permission to use their likeness, because even as an actor, your likeness is protected, thankfully. That's what the actors just went on strike for, to protect their likenesses from being reused in AI. And so someone like me has to, go to those people and say, hey, is it okay if we use your artwork in this thing? And most of the time it goes great. Most of the time it's super easy, and they'll say, yeah, I'd love to let you use it. Sometimes there's questions, does that mean I'm giving you my artwork? Does that mean I'm giving you the rights to my artwork? Does that mean, what does that mean? And sometimes people just say no. um, and in that case, if they say no, then you're kind of up a paddle. You can't use it, and you have to go back to your productions and say, they declined and you can't use it. Um, but most of the time it goes great. Most of the time it's super easy. Um, let's see. I wrote some notes, and I'm so bad at reading them off.
Jordan, quick question.
Yeah, of course.
So everyone, like all the speakers that we've had, kind of gave like a brief intro about how they got started, pretty much, their journey to where they're at from, sitting in the classroom like we are, and then, either leaving wherever city they're at, to go to LA. Can you give us a brief, I guess, description of your story?
Yeah, of course. So I moved to LA in 2012. I knew, I knew throughout high school that I wanted to work in film, but I grew up in Houston, and there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of opportunities there for that, as I'm sure some of you are probably aware. And so I did a couple of years at community college, with the plan to transfer to a bigger university, to a film program. But I became one of those people who realized that school wasn't quite for me. And so I dropped out and decided to do things the hard way, which is move to LA and start from the bottom. The benefit of film school is that you get all of these connections, right? You kind of get that head start. So I didn't have that. So I moved to LA in 2012. I started making friends. I started going to networking events, and eventually I started working my way up. I PA'd on a couple of productions, and in a couple of offices, as a day player or for like weeks at a time. Um, and then of course the unsaid thing is you have to work to support this, because a lot of those PA jobs are unfortunately unpaid. So there is a stretch of time where I was focusing on working and less on working in the industry. Um, but I did around 2017, and this is all going to be unfortunately one of those serendipitous, I met somebody and they changed my life stories. But I was a dog walker, and I met somebody who booked me on an app to come walk their dogs, and we started talking, and I found out she worked in the industry, and I found out she did clearances. And at the time I had no idea what that was. I'd never heard of it before. And so I started walking her dogs more regularly. We became friends, and eventually she asked me if I would be willing to come on as her assistant, and she would teach me how to do clearances and what the role entails. Um, I recognize that this is not a typical story. Unfortunately, like, I would love for everybody to be able to meet a friend, and for a friend to give them a job. I would love to be that friend for you, if I have the chance. But that's how it happened, and I became her assistant. She eventually gave me the title assistant clearances coordinator. She had her own freelance company that was hired by studios. She mainly worked with Netflix and NBC Universal. So a lot of the work that we did came from those two studios. Most of the properties that I've worked on are NBC Universal. Um, and she had decades of experience. She was really great. And so I worked with her for 6 years, up until last year, before the strikes happened, when she passed away. Um, and yeah, so now I'm trying to go at it alone. I'm doing the freelance thing, which is great. A lot of studios do prefer that, because that means sometimes it's cheaper for them. Um, and it means that I can also pick and choose the projects that I work on, and I can work from home. So right now I'm in my apartment. But yeah, that's kind of my journey towards this role. I kind of fell into it, luckily. Yeah.
So with after pretty much taking it on yourself, do you find it easy to, I guess you grew a lot of contacts over the last 6 years. How do you go about choosing what projects you want to work on? Is it first come, first serve, or are you more intentional about what you want to put your name to, things like that?
That's a good question. right now it's kind of first come, first serve, because unfortunately the state of the industry is feast or famine, right? You're either working all the time or you're not working at all and you're panicking about not working. Especially after the past year with the strikes and everything. And like, thank goodness the Teamsters just made a deal, so another strike is going to be avoided. Excuse me. But yes, right now it's a little bit first come, first serve. If you want to work with me, I'm happy to work with you. I did have a project recently that reached out, and they were already in post-production, so they asked me to do a little bit of post-production review, which was they wanted to send me some cuts of scenes that they thought were potentially problematic, and then get my professional opinion on them, which I'd actually never done before, but I was happy to do it because it's providing information, right? And especially for a production, it sounded like they didn't have a clearance person during principal photography, which is super important. Because it turns out that they had shot in a comic book store with loads of visible action figures. And I essentially had to tell them that you have to either reshoot this or blur everything out, because these studios, especially, they had a lot of Marvel stuff, as you do. And now that Marvel is owned by Disney, like, Disney is one of the most litigious studios in Hollywood. They will sue the pants off of you for anything. And at one point they just had a baby Yoda sitting right there on the countertop, just like right center shot. And I was like, you're great, you're gonna have to blur that out. That's one job I regretted taking.
So with stuff like that, so for instance, they're in that comic book shop, do they have to get a clearance for every single comic book in there? Or is it like, all right, most of this Disney or Marvel, so go to Marvel and you get one whole clearance, or do you have to like clear every single thing?
So in that instance, if I had been on set, I would have told them it's essentially whatever is recognizable on camera. So if it's in the far background and it's out of focus, then you can kind of get away with it. But if it's, front and center like Baby Yoda was, then 100% you have to clear it. And again, the problem with actually reaching out to clear things is the potential for a decline or a refusal. And if they refuse, then that means, again, you're out of luck. You can't use it at all. So a lot of times it's better to put those kinds of things out of focus, because then you can kind of get away with the fair use, that it's not recognizable. That's why things get blurred, and that's why things get Greeked, because then they're unrecognizable. And so, sometimes properties are okay with some of that stuff.
Oh, wait, Jordan, we can't hear you. Hold on.
Oh no.
I don't know. Oh, come on, UTSA learning technology.
Can you hear me now?
Give me 1 second.
Typical UTSA.
Can
Can you guys hear me now?
Not yet, hold on.
Okay.
All right, we're back in business. Can you hear us?
Okay. I can hear
Okay.
you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the big thing is that if something is recognizable, like the stickers on someone's laptop, because they're out of focus. I mean, I can tell that one of them is a Texas flag. But if they're out of focus and kind of towards the back, then you can get away with it a little bit more. I don't want to say get away with it, but it's quote unquote permissible. Yeah, so that's the big thing. Like I also worked on a project where in the pilot, they wanted the main character to steal a recognizable pair of Adidas sneakers, and the sneakers would be like front and center, recognizably Adidas with the 3 stripes, and you would see the main character like just pick them up and walk out the store. And a lot of times clearances can depend on context. So that context at the time, we thought would be problematic because I mean it's the main character stealing a pair of sneakers, right? But when we went to Adidas and asked, "Is this okay?" they were like, "Yeah, that's fine." So you can, you never know. And that's what makes this job really exciting, is that it changes from day to day. You get the chance to work across, get to work with every department, right? And to work across a variety of challenges in making sure that this production can be created in the vision of the people who are creating it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Do you have, like, if you get clearance, does it cost, or is it like a yes or a no? Like, could you pay to use Disney's stuff, or are they like, no?
Yeah, so it depends. A lot of times if it's like artwork like that, like the Adidas shoes, if they've already purchased them, then yeah, it could be free, and it's either a yes or no thing. It really kind of depends on what you're using. Like Disney will charge you. They will charge you thousands of dollars to use their properties. And again, there is no guarantee that they'll even say yes to you using them. So it really depends. Sometimes there's artwork on a wall. Like if you're shooting on location and there's artwork on a wall and the director or DP wants to have that artwork in the shot, then we have to track down the artist who owns the artwork, even though it's hanging in a building, 3,000 miles away. And sometimes they'll ask for a quote unquote licensing fee, where you can pay X amount to be able to license the use of their artwork. And that's the same for clips when you want to use clips of either other movies or TV shows or news programs. You usually have to pay a licensing fee to get the permission to include these things in your production. But a lot of times, some people are happy for the free promotion. Because you can set it up like that. Like, hey, I'm working on Young Rock that's going to be on NBC. And we would like to use your artwork in the background of a scene where Dwayne Johnson is talking to another character. And a lot of times people will see that and see, yeah, it's going to be on national television. And then people will be able to look up the artwork and find that it's mine, and I can make money off of that. So that gets people really excited, and that makes the process easier a lot of times.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so my question is, I guess another thing about clearance. So say like your director DB comes up to you and they say like, oh, we want to shoot in like this arcade and stuff like that. And there's a ton of old arcade machines from like the 80s or 70s or something, obviously when those were like a lot more popular. I assume you have to get some sort of clearance for it, but then what do you do if like that brand no longer exists, or it's, like that the parent company just isn't there anymore? Is there some sort of workaround? Do you just like kind of follow the trail and try and get permission for something?
Yeah. So that's also a great question. I actually worked on a project where that came up, because I worked on a pilot that eventually didn't go to series, but it was based on the creators of Doom, the video game. And so they had tons of that stuff like that. Those requests were unwieldy because they were sending so much stuff every day. But that was a lot of it. They wanted a lot of those vintage games in their offices because that's what they did, right? They wanted it to be realistic. And so a lot of times, yeah, we would basically do the research trail, right? To figure out who owned what. Maybe there was a pinball machine licensed Star Wars to create a Star Wars pinball machine. So we would have to figure out, okay, well, who actually owns the rights to this? And if the trail goes cold, like the company has dissolved or just disappeared or whatever, then I would usually, a lot of times productions also work with lawyers, right? To decide the legality of this stuff. Is it fair use? Is it public domain? It was produced before 1960. Can we use that? That sort of stuff. And so I would talk with the lawyers to see how they felt about using something that maybe didn't have an existing owner anymore. And a lot of times we would have to still kind of go through the trail to see if it led to anywhere else. Because sometimes those rights revert to a different company, or someone else buys the rights to that sort of thing. So we do have to kind of follow the trail as far as it will lead us to make sure that we're being fair and we're being equitable to the owners of this copyright, right? And yeah, if the trail goes cold, nobody owns it, then it's kind of up to the lawyer to decide if they're comfortable with it being used. And in that case, if they're comfortable with it, it's probably going to be far background where it's unrecognizable, because that limits the risk. A lot of this job is risk assessment as well. How risky is it to use these properties? It's super risky to use Baby Yoda, but maybe for a lesser known video game cabinet that nobody really recognizes anymore, that's less risky. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, cool.
I was
Yeah.
gonna lead into a question I had. So, for instance, when it comes to especially like artwork, like let's say we're filming and the painting behind you is in the center of the picture, how do you track down stuff obscure like that? Like, how would you even know who the artist is? Like, would you do the paper trail, like ask the person who owns it, where they bought it from, things like that? Is there a list that you guys use in terms of finding out who owns certain copyrights, things like that? How does that work?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So, and that kind of goes into my day-to-day working with the different productions. So the essential clearance process that I follow is, I'm, like I said, I'm working with the different productions. I'm working from home, so I'm not on set. Other clearance people might be on set. I would love to be on set. But if I'm working from home, then it's on the other departments to send me their requests, right? So say they're like you said, they're dressing a set, and they would like to use a big piece of artwork that they rented from a gallery. So they would send me a picture of the artwork and say, hey, we rented this from this gallery, and we would like to use it in a scene that's shooting in 2 days. And so I would say, great, send me if you have the invoice from the gallery that you rented it from, because that will usually have the information of the gallery. So I can contact the gallery and ask them, hey, our production rented this piece from you. We would like to use it in the scene. It will be featured. So I will send you a release to get signed. That's the other thing. Nothing is cleared until a release is signed. Like, I can't believe I forgot that. That is the most important thing. Nothing is cleared until you have a licensing agreement that's been signed or a release. And productions will usually provide me releases to get signed. Or the production lawyer will provide me a release. But that is the core of my job, is getting these releases signed that basically say I, the rights holder, am allowing this production to use this piece of artwork XYZ. And I am not signing over the rights because I recognize that I own the rights to this artwork. I am just giving them rights to use it in their production and for it to be for the production to be distributed. So yeah, so I will send a release to the gallery explaining that, and they'll either send it to the artist, or some galleries represent artists and can sign on their behalf. And sometimes there will be the back and forth of, again, they might require a licensing fee. They might want to negotiate that. Maybe the production can't pay for the licensing fee because they already rented the artwork. So there is the back and forth of working with those people, but the intent is to get the release signed. And then once the release is signed, then they can use it on the production. And so that goes for artwork, that goes for props, that goes for those Adidas sneakers in Young Rock. That goes for everything, is to get the release signed. So, and a lot of times, if they're on location and they're shooting outside and they want to use a mural that was painted on a wall, and not even necessarily graffiti, although I've had requests for graffiti as well. But yeah, if they're say they're outside of a school and there's a mural painted on the wall of the school, but they don't know who the artist is, that's when I have to do the research and track down, figure out who the artist is. And then go through the same process. If I can figure out who the artist is, then I can get in contact with them. And sometimes it's a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails. But that's when I have to do the research process and track it down. And then the goal is the same: get them to sign a release.
Would you say that the research part is the hardest, most time-consuming part, or is it negotiating with the owner on whether they will allow you to license out the property or not?
I think it depends on the person. I personally really like the research process because I'm a big nerd. I like tracking down that kind of stuff. That's what makes the job really interesting for me. Especially the clips of everything. Like, there was an episode of Ted Lasso where he was watching It's a Wonderful Life, and I asked my boss at the time, like, how did they clear that? Because I don't even know who owns It's a Wonderful Life anymore. And she was like, I don't even know who owns it. I don't know how they did this. So that stuff is really interesting to me because it's kind of the nitty gritty minutia part of it. And that's a lot of the stuff that, regular people watching TV and movies don't realize goes into it. So yeah, and to be honest, the hardest thing for me is talking to people, and making the phone calls. I'm a millennial. I hate talking on the phone. But sometimes it's just one of those things you have to suck it up and do. So I think the only thing that can be hard is the research can be tedious sometimes. If it goes cold, if there's no way to track something down, and then you have to tell people, like, I can't find who owns this, there's no way we could clear it. And that sucks. Because it feels like you can't do your job.
So how often do they ask for like a release before they spend money, like renting the painting or buying shoes or whatever? Versus doing it after they spend money on all this stuff?
I think it depends on the project. A lot of stuff we can't send a release for because a lot of the releases require exhibits. So that means we have to put a picture of what's being used on the release. There are instances where, maybe a costume designer or costume supervisor will want to be able to use a certain brand for a character. And they've picked out multiple pieces. And rather than getting each piece cleared one by one, we might be able to get them what's called a blanket release, which means that all of like all of the say all of the pieces in a certain line of clothing are covered. And that means our wardrobe department can go back and pick what they like without us having to get a specific release for it every time. I wouldn't say that's rare, but it's uncommon. I like to do it because I know it's helpful. But not a lot of brands agree to it as well. Because that it kind of makes them queasy, you know, a blanket release means that we can use anything, right? And not everyone likes that. So it kind of depends on what you're using and what you're doing. But yeah, I hope that was a good example.
Is there a difference in process from a series and film? And if so, what is it? Or have you done films also, or do you strictly do series?
Yeah, I've done a couple of films. So honestly, the only difference between series and film is that films are shorter deadlines. Films are usually only filming for, you know, weeks or a couple months at a time. And me as a clearance person, I usually stay on, rarely do I stay on through post, unfortunately. So I'm usually on through pre and principal production. And pre-production is for if there's specific things that they know are going to take a long time to clear. I'm going to tell you right now, any production you use that wants to use books, that wants to use like the title, the cover page of a book, takes at least 6 weeks. Books are the hardest things to clear and they take the longest amount of time. So I always tell people, if you have a specific book that you want used and you want us to see the cover page, or you want your characters to be reading a book, get it to us the first thing. Yeah, so the biggest difference is the timelines. They just have shorter timelines. So, you know, series shoot for 6 months at a time, and films only go, you know, 2 or 3 months. But that also means that you're on more of a, you have more urgency, because a film can't change their schedule as easily as a TV show can. And so there are things that you have to get done within a day or so, or else they can't use it. So I would say those are the biggest differences.
Piggybacking off of that, which one do you see more often? The more organic clearances where it's like, oh, we just realized that we have this in the background, or do you see that most productions, they generally know how many clearances they're gonna need for their production beforehand?
We really try to avoid the organic type of clearances, because that makes it too easy for things to slip through the cracks. My old mentor used to tell people, like, nothing goes on set until it's cleared. So, you know, and that works to varying degrees. Obviously, some things do fall between the cracks. Like I said, I'm not on set, so there is the potential, you know, for an art director to sneak something in that they didn't think needed to be cleared, and we miss it. And that's kind of where our role in post-production can come in. We can also watch cuts and alert, you know, the teams to things that aren't in our records of what's been cleared. And so yeah, we really try to avoid the organic kind of thing. We try to make sure that everything is cleared before it goes on set.
All right, one more piggyback question. So, so for an instance, like, I always bring this up with just about every person we talk to, Game of Thrones, when they had the Starbucks cup and nobody noticed it, so after it aired, how does that work?
I truly have no idea how that happened. Somebody obviously had it with them, right? And when they were sitting waiting for the set to be set up, for the shot to be set up, sorry. And no, like that's really on the script coordinator, because they're the ones in charge of continuity. They're the ones in charge of making sure that everything looked the same, sounded the same in every shot. And so if the script coordinator didn't notice that Starbucks cup, and it was clear it was a Starbucks cup, right? Like that could have opened up HBO to a huge like slew of lawsuits, right? The thing is though, one of the differences between the studios is, and I'm sure somebody from Starbucks reached out to HBO and was like, "What, WTF? How did this happen?" But the thing is with the studios, some studios play by different rules, for lack of a better descriptor. So someone like HBO and Netflix, their content is created for their subscribers, right? They don't, and so they don't have to adhere as closely to advertising laws. And like, I can't remember that, the government entity, the FTC. But yeah, the advertising laws that say ABC and NBC do, because ABC and NBC are national public broadcasting, right? And their revenue is driven by ad sales, which HBO and Netflix and like the cable programs don't have as much. So they don't have to, they have less risk. Like that's why Netflix can use tons of stuff. I worked on a Netflix movie and they had a scene where characters are playing basketball down at Venice Beach, and they wanted everybody to be wearing Nike gear. Everybody like wearing stuff, like wearing Nike shoes, wearing like shirts with the big swoop on it. And we sent it over to the Netflix lawyer, and we were like, can we do this? And they were like, yeah, it's fine. So they, and that's the thing too, a lot of ABC, NBC, CBS, the public broadcasting studios, with the ad revenue, they have to, even for product placement stuff, they have to approve or deny those deals that we make, because it may conflict with advertisers who pay for spots on their networks. So that's a lot of like minutia stuff that you have to deal with. But yeah, HBO, I don't know what consequences they face for that. But that script coordinator was not paying very, very good attention. And I can't believe that it got to that point, right? That it got to airing and nobody noticed. Like nobody in post-production said anything about it. Nobody, like nobody, which is just crazy to me. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, my question is, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Ready Player One, but it is, just full of different IPs. I mean, I can only assume like hundreds plus, but I was wondering if you would think that to be like a logistical nightmare to get it done, or if it's kind of like, oh, this is gonna be kind of satisfying to have to or like, I guess you don't like talking to people, but to have to like kind of track down like all these different things that they want to be seen.
Yeah, so I didn't see the movie, but I read the book. So I'm familiar with the story. The benefit that Ready Player One had was that a lot of the properties they used and that they wanted to use and that were included in the book are I'm sorry?
I was gonna say, like, it's also included in, like from the
Yeah,
book.
yeah. A lot of the properties that they wanted to use were directed by Spielberg. And the movie itself was directed by Spielberg. So when you have a good connection like that, that makes it a lot easier. to clear those things. Spielberg himself obviously doesn't own the rights to those movies, the studios that made them do. But if if you're working on a movie directed by Steven Spielberg and he says, I want to use a scene from the Goonies, and you basically go to Warner Brothers and say, hey, Steven Spielberg wants to use a scene from the Goonies, and they say, okay, how long? On the flip side, though, some studios are not as willing to work with you. My former boss worked on a project worked on a show that was being directed by the Russo brothers. And at the time, they hadn't directed Avengers movies, but they had written Marvel comics. And they wanted one of the characters to be reading the comic book that they wrote. And so she reached out to Marvel and they declined it. So, I mean, obviously the Russo brothers at the time didn't have the same goodwill that Steven Spielberg has. But that is another case of, if you know people in Hollywood, they will help you, or not. Or there was another show that she had worked on where she worked on something with Chris Pratt, and they wanted one of the characters who was a child holding an action figure of him from Jurassic World, and Universal declined it. So, sometimes, yes, it can be a logistical nightmare, because sometimes certain studios will decline certain things for no reason other than because they can. But that's kind of where my what's the best way to put it? That's kind of where my brain kicks in, and I really enjoy doing the research and getting that stuff done, up until the point where a studio declines it. So yeah, I would imagine working on Ready Player One was a logistical nightmare, but I would also imagine it was enjoyable in a way, because you're getting to work with all of these major famous properties that are well known throughout the world, and getting a chance to use them again in a way to introduce them to other audiences. That would have made me really happy.
Jordan, what would you say the most challenging project is that you've worked on?
So I've worked on a couple of series for Peacock. One of the most challenging was a show called One of Us is Lying, based on a book series, and it was filming in New Zealand. So that alone was challenging because they were like 16 hours ahead. And so we would be getting emails, 2, 3 in the morning when they start their day. And they also had an art director who was really great and really creative, but used a lot of really hard to track down artwork. They used a lot of stuff that was hard to track down unless you were in New Zealand, and hard to get in touch with. So that was just really difficult. Like, they actually chose a lot of artwork, because obviously New Zealand, New Zealand is in the middle of the Pacific, is in the Pacific, but they're a lot closer to China and Japan. So they use a lot of Chinese artists and Japanese artists and other Asian artists, to decorate the set, which was really great and really innovative of them, but it made it really difficult for me to try and track them down, especially with the language barrier. But that was probably the hardest thing. I mean, I've had sets where I didn't really get along with some of the crew people, and so that can be challenging. That's challenging in its own way. But yeah, I would say that probably One of Us is Lying was the most challenging, just trying to track down some of the artwork that they wanted to use and do it in a timely fashion to adhere to their deadlines, because again, they were like 16 hours ahead. So like they had a head start on me, right? So that made it really difficult. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
You had mentioned that with the books, it's 6 weeks. Is there a reason why? And is that one of the biggest challenges with the books, or Are there other things that take that long, the 6 weeks, and just why the 6 weeks?
Licensing can take a long time, again, depending on the studio that you're working with, but books. So the problem is that when you're clearing, like, say, cover artwork is owned by the publisher. It's because a lot of times that artwork is created by an artist in-house that's employed by the publisher, right? So you have to contact the publisher specifically. And unfortunately, book publishing houses have their own processes for these kinds of things. They usually have an online form that you fill out, and it goes into, for all I know, the void. And there's no way to contact a person, right? And so it's literally just the processes that the publishing houses set up for themselves. And I understand, they have their own world over there. And I'm sure they get tons of requests every day to use their things. So they have to set up their own process. But yeah, it just depends on it literally depends on the publishing house that you use. And what their process is. But a lot of times it takes at least 6 weeks. And they tell you that up front on the website that you fill out a form or whatever, that the process can take up to 6 weeks. Please don't contact us again. Please don't follow up. And like, if you follow up, it will send your request back down to the bottom of the pile. Yeah, so it's just the process that the publishing houses choose to use, unfortunately.
Hi, Jordan.
So are you typically working on like a show, or are people just contacting you for certain shots, or what is your?
So I'm working on a podcast right now, which is actually new for me. I've never done a podcast before, but and technically they are already in post-production, because they have already recorded the episodes that they want to use. And so what they're doing is, it's 2 hosts, and they have someone that they're interviewing, and it's usually a famous person. All of the people that they're interviewing are important in their line of work. And so they brought me on to help license clips that they're going to be used as like contextual fillers throughout the episode to add to the stories that the interviewee is talking about. So that's actually what I'm working on right now, is just licensing a lot of clips. And it's a lot of NBC News, ABC News, CBS. It's a lot of news stuff, which is great. But yeah, it's a lot of negotiating licensing fees. And how much of the clips we want to use, especially because we found all of the clips that were chosen were found through YouTube. And so I'm having to go to the owners and say, hey, we have this YouTube link, but if you have a master, we could take that. If you prefer us to use your master recording, then we will pay for that. But if you're okay with us just using the YouTube, we're happy to rip the audio from the YouTube, that sort of thing. And actually, I just learned today, one of the clips that they want to use, or they want to use a clip from the Benny Hill show, which I don't know if you guys are aware, is an old sketch comedy show from the BBC in the 60s. The BBC has a website where you can request clips, and they'll do the research for you for free, but they said that any clip that you license doesn't have the talent cleared. So I'm going to have to track down some old comedians from the 60s if they're still alive, and get their voices cleared, because they're going to be heard on a podcast.
Oh,
So, yeah.
That's interesting, Jordan. So Benny Hill, that's interesting. So if they've already passed away, then I would probably contact the SAG-AFTRA Estates Department, right? And then you have to provide the name, and then if they passed away, the date of death, to see if they have any beneficiary information. And then that's who you contact to clear them. Because, so I remember, I mean, I wasn't alive during Benny Hill, for the record, but just for the record, okay, guys. But for Benny Hill, that BBC owns that? Is that what you said? Or it aired?
Oh, I hope so.
Oh, so and then BBC's it's across the pond, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would assume that those actors are represented by I think it's called British Actors Equity.
Oh, okay, I've
Yeah,
never,
so
ever, okay, good to know.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. It's different, like different countries have different processes as well because they all have different copyright laws and trademark laws.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yep, I've never had to clear someone that's a part of that, right? Like, because there are
Yeah.
different unions and there are different guilds. Because it's
Yeah.
not just the Actors Guild here in the US, absolutely. So someone that's from over there, from across the pond, right, they could be part of that union, then also the one here in the US. Interesting, look at us learning. Oh, that's good to know, huh? Question, so we've asked like your most challenging, what's been your favorite project?
Um, I really liked working on Young Rock, and I worked on Keenan as well, which was only on I think for 2 seasons. Um, I'm a comedy girly. I love sitcoms. I go back and rewatch Dairy Girls all the time. But Young Rock was interesting because within Young Rock, I mean, it's obviously about, The Rock and his growing up within wrestling culture, right? Um, so they portrayed a lot of wrestlers on the show. And so we had to reach out to their families and basically tell them, hey, we're making this show, and so this wrestler is going to be portrayed on the show. And we just wanted to let you know that this is happening. And we hope that you watch. Because a lot of times Dwayne The Rock and his team also still had connections with those wrestlers, so he could reach out to them himself, or the team would do it. But there were a lot of lesser known wrestlers that we had to reach out to, and that was really cool to me. I thought that was really interesting, and it was a nice touch because a lot of times you hear about biopics being made and the families never being contacted or included, and that really bumps me out because any project that I've worked on, we've always tried to contact or include the families. So yeah, I really liked Young Rock. I really liked Keenan, as a kid growing up with Keenan and Kel and all that and that kind of stuff. That was really cool. And having watched him on Saturday Night Live. But the show itself was really fun. The crew was really fun to work on or to work with. There was actually a joke that was cut from the event, from the airing, but the show was set in Atlanta, and I guess there are a lot of like rapper owned restaurants and bars in Atlanta. And so they had a joke that they were going to a new seafood place called Ludacrabs. And the art department had made a logo for it of like a blue crab, but with Ludacris's face on it. And we had gotten Ludacris's permission to use it. We had release signed and everything, and then they cut it. But it was I thought it was incredible. Yeah, I love fun stuff like that.
I had a question.
Yes.
I noticed that when there are certain shows or like docuseries, I guess, where it's talking about a certain person, it seems like they don't need the permission of that person. Like I know there was like a Hulu TV show about Mike Tyson, and there was like some controversy on that where it's like, oh, Mike Tyson didn't give them, he didn't sign off on the show, but yet they were still able to air and whatnot. How does that work when, like, with certain other properties, you have to get the permission of somebody who's in the show that's being put into a show, but then when you write a story about somebody, you kind of don't have to.
Like
get
the
it.
Lakers show,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of the actors, or a lot of the Michael, who was it, Mr. West and all those guys said, that's not how it was, that's not, Cat Riley came out, that's not, the way they, it happened, or they betrayed me, but I know exactly what you're talking about, yeah.
So that's probably more of a legal question. I would imagine that there's usually a disclaimer, right? That there's usually a disclaimer, like either at the beginning or the end, that these events were dramatized, or that these events are, you know, not the full, not the full story. So that probably is what protects them. But I would imagine it, it goes back to risk assessment. How risky are we being in telling this story? If it's a public story and they're kind of approaching it as journalists, I would imagine that that's kind of what they get behind. Or I don't want to say hide behind, but that's probably what they use. Yeah, the same thing happened with the Pam and Tommy show, right? Pamela Anderson came out and said nobody talked to her about this, and she was really hurt that like the hardest part of her life was being dramatized like this. Yeah. I would say it's probably the disclaimer at the end that says these are based on real stories, but they are not the actual real events, and dramatized for viewing pleasure or whatever. Yeah.
How come she couldn't sue them for like this?
I mean, technically they didn't use her actual likeness because Lily James played her and wasn't her exact marker. But if they had used personal photographs of her, then they would have had to get her permission to use those photographs, right? Or unless they used photographs that were taken by photographers, in which case the photographer owns the image, right? But if they use photographs of her, then they would have to ask her permission, and she would have had to say yes. So yeah, she would have had to have known that this was happening. And that way she can't claim plausible deniability.
How do you find work and like before the strikes, how many projects were you working on at once?
Usually around 3 or 4. That's kind of my max as a person. That's the most I can do. Yeah, is about 3 or 4. And it would be about 3 or 4, maybe a movie and 3 TV shows, or maybe 4 TV shows. I mainly worked in TV, yeah.
How do you find work, like projects to work on?
So at the time before the strikes, I was still an assistant. So my boss was the one who was able to pick and choose the projects. And she had been working in the industry for decades. So she had a lot of contacts within the studios. And she was able, either they would reach out to her and say, hey, we have this show coming up and we'd like you to do clearances for it. Or, if it was a lean period, she would be able to reach out and say, hey, I don't have any work. Can you put me on something? It is getting more difficult because a lot of studios are moving towards in-house clearances, meaning they have a team in-house to do clearances as opposed to a freelance worker like me. So yeah, it is getting more difficult, and especially with how the industry is changing, obviously now that the streaming bubble has popped, and not as many productions are working, especially stateside. It is getting more difficult, but I'm hustling.
Go ahead, Tori.
Just want your opinion. So for a show like Narcos, they use government photos of when they came in and they took photos through the state and everything. Once they raided the house, how does something like that get clearance? They're taking about the FBI.
So I mean, if it's I can't speak to.
Oh, sorry.
No, I can't speak to the FBI photos. But if there's, so say a production wants to use a photo, like a child photo of the actor, right? And this can go for Narcos. This can go for any production. A lot of times set decorators will ask for personal photos of the actors to decorate the sets with, childhood photos, that kind of thing, or to use for props or whatever. We have to clear the photos. So clearing photos is you have to clear the photographer because the photographer is the one who owns the photo. Even if, even if I gave my phone to somebody to take a picture of me, the person who took that picture owns the photo, even if it's on my phone. So that's the first step, is to clear it with the photographer. And then obviously you have to clear it with the people in the photo. So even if the actor's mom is in the photo, but they're not on the show, we have to clear their mom in the photo. A lot of times, if the actor is in the show, their likeness will be covered by their contracts for being in the show. So they don't have to sign a likeness release if it's for, if it's for a show that they're on, right? But if they're the one that took the photo, then they have to, they have to sign the photographer release. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'll have a follow-up to that. Also, though, so like with images, Jordan, I found like Getty Images, or there's a couple websites that we use for photos, for images.
Mhm.
Right. Getty, I know iStock, sometimes the studio will say, no, we can't use iStock.
Yeah.
Right, but there's a couple of websites that have images that you can clear, and then you have the pricing, right, and then and the rights of that image on the release.
Yeah.
Right? So like Getty represents the photographers.
Yeah, so when you license photos from Getty, yeah, it usually gives clearance because the photographer works for Getty, and by virtue of that, Getty owns the photo. Because as a photographer, they sign over their rights to Getty, right? Yeah, so a lot of times productions will actually make deals with Getty. You can actually make a deal with Getty Images to get images at a discounted rate to be able to use as stock photos, or stuff to use for set design, like art design, artwork, making graphics and that sort of thing. Yeah, I actually worked on a show that had a deal with Getty where they could just use whatever they wanted. They just had to give us like the image numbers, the file numbers, for us to keep track of what they use. But Getty had a partnership with them, with the studio, and that allowed them like full reign of the Getty Images databases, which made things a lot easier for me.
Absolutely, like a blanket release, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah, they had like a blanket license agreement with Getty.
Mhm. That helps. Oh, go ahead, Larry.
I think there was a question in the chat.
Yeah, oh, yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So Jessica asked, is there a way to negotiate with the studio if they decline a request? For example, if they decline using a Chris Pratt action figure, could you negotiate using a blue Raptor dino figure, or do they not like negotiations? Yeah, it depends on the studio. And it depends on how important it is to your production. Like One of Us is Lying, actually, the show is set, in Southern California, despite them filming it in New Zealand. And the producers the producers for One of Us is Lying were from California. And they had actually brought over In-N-Out cups and like In-N-Out wrappers, because they wanted it to be used in the show. And In-N-Out is also famously conservative with what they allow their stuff to be used. I mean, it's a conservative company, but they're conservative with how they allow their stuff to be used. And it's one of those companies that not to negotiate with them. Like if they say no, they're not going to budge. Because they know how iconic their branding is, and they don't need the free promotion, right? But something like that, if you say, oh, we just want him to play with the Raptor figure instead, yeah, then they might have a little more wiggle room. I guess it just like it's a personal thing. I think if you feel like they're willing to negotiate, right? Then you can try it. But a lot, like if they come down with a hard no, then I don't usually negotiate. But if it's really important to the production, then yeah, I think it's a case by case basis, I think. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, yeah, I agree on that, absolutely, case by case. And I think also, Jordan, like our role is to support just in scripted television, the showrunner. So if the showrunner really wants something, and we go back and say, well, they declined a request for the Chris Pratt action figure, but perhaps the Blue Raptor, is that something that you could also envision in your project? And if they say yes, then you can go back and negotiate with that. But it's also definitely a lot of it is a lot of back and forth, and then at a certain time, supporting the vision of the showrunner and what they want. Yes.
Yeah, like for example, this obviously isn't a project that I worked on, but in the news recently, Lupita Nyong'o directed a film recently, or worked on a film recently, and they wanted to use a Taylor Swift song. And originally Taylor's team declined the usage. And Lupita Nyong'o wrote a letter to Taylor talking about how important this project is to her and how important this song is to her and how she would really like to marry the things and use the song. And then eventually Taylor accepted it and changed her mind and let them use the song. So there are instances like that. There is a show where someone was trying to use personal photos, and the photographer declined to let them use personal photos, and the showrunner had to reach out and wrote them a letter about how important it is that they use these photos to be accurate to the time period and to tell the story, and how passionate he is about telling this story. And they changed their minds. So it's a total case by case basis, and it really depends on how important it is to the production. If they're willing to say, it's okay, we don't need those in and out cups, then it's fine. You can go on with your day. But if they really feel passionately about it, a lot of times getting the higher ups to involved will help.
Go ahead, Tori.
So are you typically talking to lawyers, or like, who are you typically asking for permission?
Yeah, so I work alongside lawyers. And if there's anything that I feel uncomfortable with, or uncomfortable assessing the risk of, because obviously, like, I'm not a lawyer. Like, straight up, I'm not a lawyer. I did not go to law school. I've taken online courses in copyright law and trademark law, but I have not taken the bar test. So and productions know that, right? They're not hiring me at lawyer rates. And so if there are instances where I feel uncomfortable making an assessment, on whether or not something is clear, or whether or not graphics created by the production department are okay to use because they're imitating another well-known graphic, then that's where I work alongside the lawyer and send it to them and say, hey, do we think this is okay? Lawyers approve a lot of that stuff for me. Stuff that's created in production that doesn't need a release signed. That's another thing. If your art department creates something, makes something original, that doesn't have to be cleared by a release, because that's cleared by the contracts of the makers within the production. Any artwork that they create for the production is owned by the production. But that would, if someone tried to make like a Sonic cup, but it's renamed something else and they use different colors so that it's imitating Sonic but isn't Sonic itself, I would have to send it to the lawyer to see, hey, how comfortable are you with this fake Sonic logo? And they can approve or deny it based on, their qualifications. right? So I am not the legal authority on the production, but I work alongside them to make sure that everything is legally, you know, for lack of a better word, cleared.
Go ahead, Emily.
Is there ever an instance where the production makes something that happens to be similar to something else without knowing?
Yeah, there's been a couple times where I have recognized something but they haven't. And that is also when I would bring the lawyer in and I would say, hey, I don't think they know this, but this looks like this thing. And again, the lawyer can judge whether or not the changes were enough to make it different. But that, that is one of those times when you would have to tell the art department, like, hey, this thing looks too close to this thing. And you have to change it more. You have to change it more so it's less recognizable. Yeah, I worked on a project where art department or the wardrobe department bought a sweater that had the painting The Scream embroidered, knitted into it, so it looked like they were wearing, the paint, the guy that and the lawyer was like, we can't do this, this is clearly The Scream and we would have to get clearance to use The Scream, we can't do this. And so I told the wardrobe, can you Greek it, can you cover it up somehow? And they cut out leopard spots to sew over it. And the lawyer was like, that just makes it worse. Because you could still tell it's The Scream and you could still tell that they had clearly tried to edit it, but it wasn't sufficient enough. And so he was like, you just straight up can't use that sweater. There's no way we can get clearance for it. And especially now that you've sewn on fake leopard spots to it. Yeah. I know we've gone over time too. Are you guys okay?
No, we are gonna wrap it up. Does anybody have any final questions? One question? No. I know. Go ahead, Arlen.
What's one of the most valuable lessons that your mentor taught you?
Oh my gosh. One of the most valuable things, and I actually wrote this down, so thank you for bringing it up. The most important thing is to be kind and compassionate. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people with the same goal, right? We all want to get something made. We all love film and TV. That's why we're in this industry. And kindness gets you a long way. In any, just in life in general, but especially in this industry. If you're kind and compassionate and present and diligent, you do your work and you help out where you can, those are the most important things. Those are the most important things she taught me, and those are the most important things I've learned in the industry. You will get what you want. You will achieve your goals, and people want to help you. That's the thing, is people love to get these things made. They're in the industry because they love it. They want to help you get things made. And that goes for the studio rental places who rent out artwork and props and costumes. That goes to the people who are working on set. That goes to the post-production, that goes to all the way up to the talent agents that I've had to talk to negotiate, likenesses, getting their actors paid, and even actors whose likenesses you're releasing. For Young Rock, there's an episode where they used various different clips of action movies, and we had to clear Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they both agreed to let us use their likeness. And they only asked for like SAG day pay, which is $1,200, which is unheard of for stars of their caliber. I was just like gobsmacked that they were so kind, and so their representatives were so easy to work with. Yeah, so my biggest advice is be kind and be diligent and be helpful, because those are the qualities that will get you anything that you want in this industry, and will take you far.
I do. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jordan. I love that. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everybody, for the
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening to my rambling.
We'll take
I
it.
hope
We'll
it
take
helped.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, guys. Thanks.